My name is Martha Parker. I am 54 years old. A structural engineer by trade. And for most of my life, I've lived right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you're hearing my story today, you probably know a thing or two about family, disappointment, and the bitter taste of being overlooked. Maybe you've spent decades believing that if you just tried harder, gave more, loved deeper, eventually you'd be recognized. Maybe, like me, you're still waiting. Growing up in the Midwest in the 90s, respect wasn't something you could demand. It had to be earned, usually in silence. My parents, Ruth and Walter, lived in a grand old house on the north side, Victorian. Drafty in winter, and always a little too big for the four of us. My younger brother Charles and I both grew up beneath those high ceilings and dark wood beams. But you'd think we were raised on different planets. I always thought this birthday, would be the turning point. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe just hopeful. We gathered for my mother's 65th birthday. The house filled with laughter. The smell of roast beef and old perfume. Cousins darting between legs and the clink of ice in glasses. Aunts. Uncles. Even neighbors stopped by to wish Mom well. I spent days preparing. I cooked. Cleaned. Made sure my parents' favorite old jazz records were ready to play on the big stereo in the living room. And yet, as always, it was Charles who shone in their eyes. Charles, the pride of the Parker family. The only son. The one everyone said was destined to carry on the family name. Never mind that he's spent more nights in Atlantic City than at home. Or that he's changed jobs more times than I've bought new winter coats. He always landed on his feet, usually on a soft pile of parental cash. That afternoon, after cake and photos, the mood shifted. My father cleared his throat, calling for attention. Family, before we wrap up this wonderful day, your mother and I have a little surprise. All eyes turned. Outside, in the driveway, sat a gleaming Cadillac Eldorado, polished to a high shine. A giant red bow fixed to the hood. People gasped. Someone whistled. Charles's face broke into the kind of smile I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "For Arson Charles," Dad announced, voice thick with pride. Because every man deserves a proper car to represent this family. And he'll need it especially once the time comes to manage our affairs. There it was. In front of everyone, the next head of the family. The future owner of everything they'd built. The words stung. But I held my breath, waiting for my turn. Maybe a thank you. A moment of acknowledgement. Instead, my mother pressed a small box into my hands, a jewelry box. Light as air. Inside, a single crisp bill. $2. "We know you don't care for flashy things, Martha," she said gently. "But it's a start for your own rainy day fund." The room fell silent. I felt a flush creep up my neck. $2. Not even enough for coffee and a newspaper at the corner store. My parents looked at me with those polite, expectant smiles. The same smiles they'd worn at every graduation, every job promotion. Every time I'd come home alone, I tried to hide my embarrassment, forcing a laugh. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad." Charles smirked, twirling the keys around his finger. "Don't worry, sis. I'll give you a ride sometime if you're nice to me." The crowd chuckled, no one meeting my eyes. In that moment, every little slight, Every overlooked achievement. Every time I'd put the family first and gotten nothing in return. Crashed over me like a wave. I remembered staying up all night sewing Dad's torn suit before his big meeting. The weekends I canceled with friends to watch Charles when he got in trouble. The sacrifices. The silence. The hope that one day they'd see me not just as the girl, but as someone who mattered. But family traditions run deep here. Sons inherit. Daughters marry. My grandmother used to say, "That's just how it's done." I'd worked my whole life to prove myself engineer. Homeowner. The one who sent money home when bills got tight. None of it mattered next to a son with a familiar last name. Maybe you're watching this right now and nodding. Thinking of your own Charles. Or your own mother, with her polite smile and quiet judgments. Maybe you're wondering if it's ever too late to demand your due. Or maybe you're just here for the story, hoping someone else's heartbreak will make yours a little lighter. Comment where you're watching from, what time it is, and whether you've ever felt betrayed by family. Hit like so more people hear this story. Because what happened next, well, it changed everything. That night, as the laughter faded and the house emptied, I realized something I should have seen years ago. They'd made their choice. And for the first time in 54 years, I was ready to make mine. People like to say that the past is just old news. Something you can tuck away in a box and store in the attic. But I've learned the past is more like the foundation of a house hidden, but holding up everything above it. Sometimes, all it takes is one crack for everything to come tumbling down. My story. The one that led to that humiliating afternoon with the Cadillac and the $2 bill. Didn't start in that moment. It started decades earlier. Under the same Victorian roof in Milwaukee, where I learned very young that in the Parker family, your place was set before you were old enough to speak. I was the firstborn. A winter baby. Quiet and serious from the start. Mom used to joke that I never cried, I just watched. I suppose that's what happens when your parents are waiting for a son. For the first 5 years of my life, I was the only child. And it was just the three of us. We weren't rich, but Dad's job at the machine plant paid the bills. And Mom worked part-time at the library. Our home was filled with books and the scent of pot roast, with snow tracked in from thick winter boots. Then Charles arrived, a healthy, squalling boy with a head full of blonde hair and a laugh that could break tension in any room. The mood shifted almost overnight. The gifts. The family visits. The way Dad held him high and called him the future of the Parkers. At every holiday gathering, Charles was passed from lap to lap. Everyone eager to pinch his cheeks and declare him the next big man in the family. I was told, "Be a good girl, Martha. Help your mother. Or let Charles have the first piece, he's the baby." It wasn't all bad. Not at first. I loved my little brother. He was funny, charming. And sometimes, when no one was watching, he looked at me with real affection. But as the years passed, the gap widened. Mom would say, "Martha, you're the responsible one. You don't need as much attention." Dad would pat my head, distracted, before returning to teach Charles how to swing a bat or change a tire. By the time I was 12, I was setting the table, helping with laundry, and babysitting Charles after school so Mom could work extra hours. I excelled in school, but every report card was met with a lukewarm, "Good job, honey," before the conversation turned to Charles's Little League games or his latest scraped knee. When I won first place at the Wisconsin Science Fair, beating out every boy in my grade, my parents didn't even make it to the award ceremony. They were driving Charles to a hockey tournament 3 towns over. At church on Sundays, I listened to sermons about kindness and humility, then watched as Mom praised Charles for every minor achievement. While my best efforts seemed invisible. "Don't make a fuss, Martha," she'd say. "Let your brother have his moment." Even my relatives fell in line with the family tradition. At family reunions, my aunts cooed over Charles, telling me how lucky I was to have such a talented brother. I learned early that being quiet and helpful was safer than drawing attention to myself. Looking back, there were warning signs everywhere. When Dad's cousin died without children, leaving a small inheritance, my parents used it to pay for Charles's private high school tuition while I stayed at the crowded public school. The logic was always the same: Charles needs every advantage. You're so self-sufficient, Martha. I worked part-time through high school, saving every penny for college. When acceptance letters arrived, I remember the pride swelling in my chest. I'd been awarded a scholarship to the University of Wisconsin's engineering program. I was the first Parker woman to go to college. But at the graduation party, Dad gave a toast to the next chapter for the Parkers. May Charles carry the family name with pride. I can still taste the cheap punch and forced smile. Charles, meanwhile, coasted through life. His teachers called him spirited. And every time he got into trouble, skipping class, sneaking out, crashing Dad's car, there was always an excuse. "Boys will be boys," Mom said. Or, "He's just finding his way." They bailed him out, cleaned up his messes, and forgave him every time. I, on the other hand, got grounded for a B+ in calculus. College was my escape. I rented a drafty apartment above a hardware store, took on night shifts at the diner, and sometimes went a week eating nothing but canned soup. Still, I graduated with honors and landed a job at a respected engineering firm. Each time I called home, Mom asked if I'd met anyone special, while Dad wanted to know when I was coming back to help out around the house. I sent money when bills were tight, drove home during every holiday, and handled repairs when the pipes burst or the furnace died. Yet whenever there was a family photo, Charles stood in the center, while I lingered near the edge. My parents told anyone who'd listen that Charles was destined for big things. Meanwhile, he bounced between jobs, car sales, insurance, a short-lived stint as a stockbroker, all financed by family loans. The pattern never changed. Each Christmas, I bought thoughtful gifts: a wool coat for Mom, a signed baseball for Dad, something special for Charles. In return, I received grocery store gift cards and, more than once, a rain check for dinner that never happened. Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining it all, if maybe I was just too sensitive, too disparity for approval. But friends saw it, too. My college roommate Laura, who would later become my closest confidant, once said, "Martha, you're carrying that whole family on your back, and they treat you like you're invisible." By the time that birthday rolled around, I'd grown used to being second best. Or so I thought. But there's a difference between surviving and thriving, between being useful and being valued. The hurt runs deeper when it's doled out in small, constant doses until one day, you realize you can't carry it anymore. And that day, with the Cadillac and the $2 bill, was the day I finally broke. It's strange how you can spend decades swallowing small slights, brushing off insults as jokes or harmless tradition. And yet, a single moment can shatter whatever fragile peace you've built around your heart. That birthday evening, After the Cadillac spectacle had faded and distant cousins began pulling on coats and saying their goodbyes, my mother suggested we move to the dining room for a little family time. The old chandelier cast soft shadows on the wallpaper, and the room seemed to shrink as my parents, Charles, and I sat together at the polished mahogany table, just the four of us. As it had been when I was young. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed we could find our way back. I had spent weeks searching for the perfect gifts. Not just for Mom, but for everyone. For Dad, a set of engraved chess pieces. Knowing how much he loved to play on quiet Sunday afternoons. For Mom, a silver pendant with an intricate rose design, her favorite flower. One I remembered from the backyard gardens of my childhood. For Charles, a first edition book about classic American cars. He'd once told me it was his dream to own one of every model pictured in its pages. Each present was wrapped carefully, with handwritten notes tucked inside. As I placed them in front of each person, my heart raced with a mix of hope and dread. Would they notice? Would anyone remember, even a week from now, that I cared enough to pay attention? Charles, of course, dove for his box first. He tore through the paper, eyes lighting up as he recognized the cover. "Wow," he said, flipping through the pages with surprising reverence. "Did you actually spend money on this?" "Martha," I nodded, trying to smile. "It's a collector's edition. I remembered how much you liked those old Buicks and Cadillacs." He gave a short laugh. But it wasn't cruel, not yet. "Thanks, sis. Maybe someday I'll let you ride in my new car, too." Mom's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the pendant. For a second, something soft flickered in her expression. Was it gratitude? Or guilt? "It's lovely, Martha," she said quietly. "Thank you." Dad moved the chess pieces through his fingers, humming with vague approval. Always so thoughtful. "Kid." The moment didn't last. My father cleared his throat and picked up a stack of legal papers from a drawer, setting them squarely on the table. "There's something important we need to discuss now that we're all here. Charles, Martha. It's about the future of the Parker family." My stomach tightened. "What's this?" Dad looked straight at Charles, not at me. "Your mother and I have decided to update our will and trust documents. It's time to start transferring responsibility and assets to the next generation. Charles, you'll be listed as sole heir to the house, the Cadillac, and our savings account. It's only right that the family name and legacy remain in your hands." The words felt like a punch. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Dad, what about me?" My mother's eyes darted away. "We know you're independent. Martha, you've made a good life for yourself. Charles needs this foundation to build his own family someday. You've always managed." I looked at Charles, searching for some sign of understanding. But his face was smug, triumphant. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Come on, sis. It's not like you'd know what to do with a house this size anyway. Or do you want to be the crazy cat lady rattling around here alone?" I swallowed hard. "I've spent years helping you both. I send money, fix the house, drive up every holiday, put my life on hold. Does that count for nothing?" Charles let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, please, Martha, stop acting like some kind of saint. You've always loved being the martyr. If you really wanted to help, you'd move back here and take care of them every day. But no, you'd rather play career woman and pretend you're better than the rest of us." His words stung in places I didn't know were still raw. Dad added, almost gently. You're strong, Martha. You don't need our help. Charles. Well, he needs some direction. And he's the son. My blood went cold. The room was suddenly suffocating. I remembered every lonely night in my freezing apartment. Every phone call I'd answered at 2 in the morning when Charles needed a ride. Every time I'd set aside my own needs to rush home. I thought about the times Mom had called me crying. And I'd been the one to reassure her. Not Charles. I thought about Dad's bad knee. The late-night pharmacy runs. The winter storms I'd driven through just to shovel their walk and make sure they had groceries. All of it. Invisible. Erased in the flick of a pen. The conversation ended with a final flourish of signatures. Charles signed with a dramatic scrawl, turning to me with a smirk. Don't worry, Martha. Maybe I'll rent you a room when I'm the boss around here. I'm sure we can work out a family discount. The cruelty in his tone was deliberate. The room erupted in polite laughter. But none of it reached me. My hands trembled as I gathered my things. I didn't cry, tears wouldn't come. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me. I'd wasted too many years believing my turn would come. That loyalty and love would be enough. I excused myself. Voice flat. Thank you for dinner. I hope you enjoy your new car. Charles. Nobody tried to stop me as I walked upstairs to the old guest room. The walls lined with childhood photos where Charles was always front and center. I sat on the bed. Heart pounding. Mind racing. But what they didn't know, what they had never cared enough to see, was that I'd stopped hoping for their approval long ago. And I had no intention of letting this be the end of my story. But what they didn't know was, that night, sleep didn't come. I lay in the small guest room, staring up at the old water-stained ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the glass. Every sound in the house felt loaded with memory: the creak of floorboards, the faint tick of the hall clock, the distant hum of Charles talking on the phone downstairs, probably boasting to some friend about his new car and his future inheritance. I replayed the scene at the table in my mind, over and over. I thought about leaving, just packing my suitcase, driving back to my quiet apartment, and letting them live with the choices they'd made. But something inside me hardened. I'd spent a lifetime swallowing disappointment, rationalizing unfairness. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, finally, it was anger. Real, clean anger. The kind that brings clarity, not chaos. At dawn, I tiptoed down the hall to my mother's study to retrieve a book I'd left there months before. That's when I saw it, a thick manila folder, open on the desk, full of official-looking papers. Out of curiosity, or maybe instinct, I glanced through them. It was the estate file, drafts of their wills, old deeds, and, to my surprise, a faded copy of my grandparents' original trust documents, dated back to 1957. There, highlighted in blue, was a clause that caught my breath. Inheritance shall favor the child who provides ongoing care and support to the parents in their later years. In the event of neglect or proven misconduct by any child, said, child's share may be revoked upon evidence presented in probate court. Gender shall not be a deciding factor. My heart pounded. Could it be that all these years, the tradition my family clung to, the idea that only sons inherited, was just a story? A preference, not the law. I read it again, hardly daring to believe. I needed help. But not just anyone's. I needed Laura. Laura and I had been friends since college. She was sharp, ethical, and the only person I trusted to tell the whole truth. These days, Laura was a rising star in family law. I called her before sunrise, my voice trembling. "Laura, it's Martha. I need a favor. A big one." She didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in an hour." By 8 o'clock, we sat in my mother's study, poring over legal documents, steaming mugs of coffee between us. Laura's brow furrowed as she read the clause, lips moving silently. "You know," she finally said, "this isn't just old-fashioned. This is illegal. Wisconsin law changed years ago. Gender can't be the sole basis for inheritance. And this trust explicitly says care and conduct matter most. Martha, you have grounds to contest." I felt a nervous spark of hope. Do I have a chance?" Laura smiled wryly. "Let's find out." The rest of that week passed in a haze of quiet action. I made calls, wrote down everything I'd done for my parents, every doctor's visit, every payment, every night spent tending to Dad after his knee surgery. Laura and her assistant tracked down medical records, old emails, even Christmas cards with my signatures. I never realized how many ways you could prove love until you were asked to account for it. Meanwhile, Laura hired a private investigator to look into Charles's recent behavior. It didn't take long. The reports came back. Charles had spent the past year living in Atlantic City more than Milwaukee, racking up gambling debts, missing calls from home, even leaving my parents stranded after promising to drive them to a cousin's funeral. There were bank statements, photos, witness testimonies, all pointing to a simple fact: Charles had not only failed to care for our parents, he'd actively put them at risk. Laura insisted we keep everything quiet for now. "Don't tip your hand," she said. "Let them think they've won." For the first time in my life, I felt the power of holding back, of being underestimated. I still made dinner, cleaned up after everyone, even offered to help Charles get insurance for his Cadillac. He declined, of course, with a scoff. "Don't worry, Martha. I have friends who handle things for people like me. You wouldn't understand. Big money, big responsibilities. You know." His tone was so smug it nearly undid me. But I smiled, biting my tongue. One evening, Laura and I sat at a coffee shop downtown, surrounded by people bundled up against the March cold. "You know," Laura mused, "the law is on your side here. But you have to be prepared for the fallout. Family court gets ugly. They'll say things you never expected. Are you ready for that?" I stared into my mug. "I'm ready for the truth to come out. For once." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then let's do this. For you." All that week, I watched Charles strut around the house, spinning keys on his finger, talking about all the ways he'd renovate the old place, gonna rip out that ugly garden, finally, maybe put in a pool. This house deserves to be more than just a museum for Dad's old junk. "And Martha, maybe you can help me with paperwork. You know, since you're good with boring stuff." I almost laughed. The arrogance was a shield one I was more than ready to break. By the end of the month, everything was in place. Laura filed the petition to contest the will and enforce the original trust. We had documentation, evidence, and most important, a story that was finally about to be heard. That night, as I watched the sun set behind the bare branches in my parents' backyard, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for approval. or hoping for recognition. I was standing up for myself. And for the truth. They had made their choice. Now, it was my turn. The day of the family meeting arrived with a cold ration. Gray drizzle, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes even the grand old house feel a little smaller. A little less certain of itself. My parents insisted on gathering everyone in the formal living room. The one reserved for holidays and important occasions. I recognized the ritual when big news came. The Parkers did it in style. Charles strutted in first. Tsarkes Youngling. Wearing a brand new suit that was a little too flashy for our tastes, but perfect for his ego. He sprawled on the leather sofa and shot me a smirk. You look nervous. Sis? Don't worry. Maybe I'll let you park my Cadillac once in a while after all this is done. He winked at our mother, who smiled approvingly. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding, clutching the folder Laura and I had prepared. My father, always so formal, called the meeting to order with a practiced air. Thank you for coming. We want to finalize everything today. So there's no confusion about the estate or the house. His eyes landed on Charles. And for a second I thought I saw something like doubt. But it passed quickly. Just then, Laura entered, briefcase in hand. Her presence calm and direct. My parents looked surprised, especially Charles, whose grin slipped for the first time all day. Who's this? Martha got a lawyer now. You know you're just wasting your money. Right. Laura ignored him and introduced herself. I'm Laura Jensen, representing Martha Parker. I'd like to review some details before any documents are signed. She set her papers on the table with a quiet authority that made everyone pause. My mother frowned. Martha. Is this really necessary? I answered quietly. But my voice was steady. Yes. I want things done properly. For everyone's sake. Laura began calmly, showing the original trust from 1957 and explaining the specific clause about care and conduct, not gender-determining inheritance. She outlined Wisconsin's inheritance law, clarifying that outdated family traditions held no weight in court. According to the evidence, Martha has provided substantial care and support over the past several years, including financial aid, medical arrangements, and physical presence during times of need. Laura said, sliding a thick dossier across the table. Charles scoffed, loud and dismissive. What? A couple of grocery runs and phone calls. That's what you're pinning your hopes on? Martha. Seriously. You're just jealous because I've got the guts to go after what I want. Some people are born leaders, some are just, well, assistants. He snorted. Don't blame me because life left you behind. Laura didn't even blink. We also have documentation of Charles's repeated absences, gambling debts, and his failure to fulfill promises made to his parents, leaving them stranded, using family funds for personal gain, and neglecting his responsibilities as a son. My father's face drained of color. Is this true? Charles's bravado cracked for a moment. But he doubled down. Oh. Come on. Dad. She's just bitter. I'm the one who deserves this. I'm your son. You can't just cut me out because she played nursemaid for a couple of holidays. Laura pressed on. The trust is clear. Any child proven to have neglected or mistreated their parents forfeits their right to inherit. The law is on Martha's side. If you force this to court, I assure you the outcome will not be favorable for Charles and could delay or even invalidate the entire estate's distribution. The room went silent except for the steady ticking of the old clock. Then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. The private investigator Laura had hired stood there, delivering a stack of photographs, Charles at casinos, receipts for money borrowed against the house, bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes filled with a sorrow I'd never seen before. Charles exploded, face red, voice rising. "This is all lies. You can't do this to me. I'm the only son." "What? You want to hand everything to the spinster who thinks she's better than us? She's always been jealous. Always trying to make me look bad because her own life's a joke. Go ahead. Take this stupid house. See who visits you when you're old and alone." The venom in his words shocked even my parents. Laura remained composed. "We are prepared to proceed in probate court unless an immediate lawful redistribution is signed. I suggest you consider your position carefully, Mr. Parker." Dad's hands shook as he turned to my mother, then to me. For the first time, he didn't sound like the patriarch, just a tired man who realized the consequences of a lifetime of favoritism. "Maybe we've made some mistakes," he whispered. "Maybe it's time to make this right." With Laura's guidance, new documents were drawn splitting the estate equally, including the house, savings, and even the Cadillac. Charles, still fuming, signed only after my father insisted. "Son, this is the only fair way forward." For a moment, it was all a blur, pens scratching, papers shuffling, old resentments swirling like dust in the sunlight. I didn't gloat. I simply felt free. But as Laura gathered the signed documents, something caught my eye, a small key taped to the back page of the trust. I recognized it instantly, the key to a long-forgotten lockbox my grandmother kept in her bedroom closet. I'd almost forgotten it even existed. After the documents were signed and the air in the living room had finally begun to clear, I excused myself quietly. My hands still trembled as I walked up the creaky old staircase toward the bedroom that once belonged to my grandmother. The tiny brass key in my palm felt heavier than it should, like it contained the weight of everything that had ever been left unsaid in this family. The closet still smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. A time capsule from a different era. I knelt and moved aside a stack of faded quilts, my fingers brushing the cool metal of the lockbox. For a moment, he hesitated. Part of me feared whatever secrets were still buried might hurt more than help. But I turned the key anyway. Inside was a small collection of letters, yellowed with age, each addressed to me in my grandmother's careful, looping script. Beneath them, tucked in a velvet pouch, was a silver locket I'd last seen when I was a little girl, one my grandmother wore every day, always telling me it held the real treasure of the Parker family. I opened it, expecting a photograph, but instead found a folded note. "To the child who loves without expectation, you are the legacy." I read her words, tears finally flowing. Not from anger, but from a bittersweet sense of release. My grandmother had seen me not as a consolation prize or a background character, but as someone who mattered. Someone who could carry on the best of what our family once stood for: kindness, loyalty, and the courage to choose fairness even when it hurts. Downstairs, the mood had changed. My parents sat together, silent and heavy. No longer the authorities of my childhood, but simply two aging people coming to terms with their mistakes. Charles sulked, unable to meet my gaze, stripped of his certainty and his unearned entitlement. For the first time, The house didn't feel like it belonged to anyone, not to Charles. Not to my parents. Not even to me. It felt peaceful. As if a storm had passed. I didn't linger. I packed my things quietly, taking only what I needed. No trophies. No family heirlooms, just the locket. My grandmother's letters. And my own hard-won sense of self. I left the house with a gentle click of the door behind me, stepping out into a chilly dusk that felt full of promise. I thought about the years I'd spent bending myself to fit a story someone else had written, about how I'd let other people decide my value. Believing family loyalty meant accepting whatever scraps of love were handed down. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is rewrite your own ending. Sometimes, walking away, with your head high and your heart still open, is the greatest act of love you can offer, not just for yourself, but for everyone watching. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return Charles' calls, though he left rambling voicemails that swung from anger to apology. My parents reached out, softer now, asking if we could meet for coffee or a Sunday lunch. I agreed on my terms. In my time, I was done begging for a seat at their table. I had built my own. I focused on work, poured myself into a new community garden project, and spent quiet evenings reading my grandmother's letters. Her words echoed, "You are the legacy." It wasn't about money, or property, or the family name. It was about the courage to love, to stand up for yourself, to demand fairness, even if you have to do it alone. Looking back, I realize I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance. I was fighting for dignity, for the right to be seen, not as an afterthought, but as someone worthy of respect, no matter what tradition, law, or even blood might say. And to you, watching this, maybe you know the sting of being overlooked. Maybe you've wondered if your own story is worth telling. Let me tell you, it is. You have the right to demand more, to set boundaries, to walk away from people who only love you when it's easy. You are not alone, even when your family tries to make you believe you are. If you've ever witnessed or lived through a story as unfair as mine, I invite you to share it in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking family stories, the kind your relatives hope you never hear. Because sometimes, the only way to heal is to speak the truth out loud and let the world see you for who you truly are.